Hello everyone, and welcome back to our third question in my marking guide to looking at the VCAR exam for economics. As I've said with all the other videos, basically I'm saying this so I'm not liable for anything that's not accurate, but these are all just my opinions. So if you don't agree with my opinions, hopefully VCAR agrees with you, but this is based on my experience in teaching economics for the last 7 years, what I think VCAR would want, but VCAR sometimes wants very specific things that no one thought about, and we'll find out about when they release their examiner's report, hopefully early to mid-term one next year, unless it's delayed because of the later exams. But let's get into this question. This is the shortest question on the exam, and not too bad, mostly theoretical. So let's get straight into it. So first up, explain the relationship between an efficient allocation of resources and aggregate supply. When you break this question down, it's very similar to some past questions about productivity and production. It's kind of a similar mindset to that, generally, as you do. So what you're doing is you're going to define both of them. So def and def, and then how the allocation of resources impacts AS, and then how AS can impact efficiency, ENC. Oh God, that's not working. Here we go. So when we talk about that, so you're going to say efficient allocation of resources is when there is no other combination of production that can make living standards better off. Whereas aggregate supply is just the total value of all goods and services produced in a nation over a period of time. So if you do that, you're going to get your two definitions right there. And then we're going to talk about how an efficient allocation of resources can affect aggregate supply. So when resources are allocated efficiently, this means that we should be producing at our productive capacity, which means we are maximizing production and therefore maximizing our aggregate supply. So if resources are allocated efficiently, we should have a high aggregate supply. Whereas when we talk about how aggregate supply can impact efficiency, is that sometimes we may increase aggregate supply in ways that do not positively or might not be a positive to our efficiency. So if we increase aggregate supply by creating structural employment through replacing workers with technology, this could actually make the allocation of resources slightly worse, as living standards are going to be worse because there's more unemployment. I'm assuming with the fact that this is 4 marks, they're going to want both directions. So they're going to want how one affects the other and then how one affects the opposite way. So efficient allocation of resources on aggregate supply and then aggregate supply on efficient allocation of resources. If you do all of that, you should get 4 marks. So you might have different explanations of the relationship, and hopefully that will be all right if you have justified yourself. Now for part B, explain how the following aspects of budgetary policy might influence aggregate supply and the achievement of strong and sustainable economic growth. I kind of like this question. It breaks into 2 parts, spending on education and training and spending on infrastructure. Part of the reason why I enjoy it is because if you have been following along with any of the videos, I told you from my educated opinion that I thought they were going to ask specific questions about specific aggregate supply measures because they've got more room to do so rather than just giving you the option. So hopefully if you followed that and did it, you should have been fine. So with this, you're going to give a general overview of spending on education and training. So what that means. So that's going to increase the quality of human capital. And then that will lead to increased productivity as workers get more output per input. That therefore leads to increased aggregate supply, which should then lead to us being more likely to achieve the goal of strong and sustainable economic growth. In this first part, I'll define the goal of strong and sustainable economic growth as well. So the highest growth rate possible without running into any inflationary external environmental pressures, around 3 to 3.5% real GDP growth per annum. But then the second part, I would not do that because it's part of the same question. It's assumed that you've already defined the goal. But if you do these 3 steps, that should be the 3 marks for the first part. And then when we look at the second part, investment in infrastructure, this one I find interesting because investment in infrastructure I often look at as short-term, long-term. Normally it's a 4-mark type question, but because this is going to be out of 3, I'm assuming that if you just look at the short-term or the long-term benefits, it's going to be okay. So I would honestly probably look at the long-term benefits of this. So like your overview of investment in infrastructure, so improving the quality of capital resources, e.g. roads, train lines, factories, etc. And then I talk about how that increases efficiency via reduced travel times, because I'd be going with the example of like, I would have been talking about like the Westgate Tunnel. I would have probably dropped the example of Westgate Tunnel just to like big note myself, be like, the government has invested $7.6 billion or $6.7 billion into funding the Westgate Tunnel. When this is completed, it's going to help increase efficiency by reduced travel times, which decreases cost of production for businesses, which leads to increased overall production or more willingness to produce, and therefore increased aggregate supply, which leads to us being more likely to achieve the goal of strong sustainable economic growth. And so that's long-term impacts, but the reason why I do that is because it's easier to talk about more generally to cover all of those points. And you'd easily get 3 marks if you talked about all those things. Bonus points with either of these questions if you have named a specific policy, not necessarily required based on the question that BCAR has asked, but if you do that, it's really showing the examiner you know your stuff. And I'm pretty sure if you've done that in the start of your question and have gone into the reasons why that will benefit the goal of strong and stable economic growth, you're going to be like, wow, pat this kid on the back, give them 4 marks, pass it off, they will get a great study score. All right, so that's been question 3, the shortest question on the exam. I'll be back later today with question 4, and then we'll be all done, and you don't have to worry about the exam ever again until your study score comes out later in December. So other than that, if you have any questions at all, leave a comment below, send me an email, more than happy to chat. Still very, very happy with all the kind things people have been saying in my emails and in comments, so thank you for that. Other than that, I hope you have a wonderful day, and I will probably see you later today, if not next time. Goodbye.